Welcome to Half Hour With. I'm Ann Thompson with IndieWire, and we've got the two filmmakers behind My Octopus Teacher, the incredibly successful Netflix documentary. Pippa Ehrlich, hello, welcome, and James Reed, welcome. And before we get started, let's play a clip from My Octopus Teacher.
I remember the day when it all started, seeing this really strange thing. I had this crazy idea. What happens if I just went every day? But you realize that there's a line that can't be crossed.
So, like many people, I checked out My Octopus Teacher on Netflix because I had heard so much buzz around it. Everybody I knew was watching it. They were crying. They were telling me that I had to see it. I'm going to start with you, Pippa. Do you have some explanation for why this movie has had such an incredible emotional impact on people who see it?
What this film did, and I'm really happy that we could do that, is it transported people to another world, and a very, very beautiful and unexpected world, and also into the mind of a truly fascinating creature in a very unexpected way. So I think that's kind of why people have watched it more than once, and it's also a hopeful story. And I think really, with what's going on in the world at the moment, people want to feel hope, and they want to feel uplifted, and they want to feel like there's something more out there than what they're dealing with on an everyday basis.
It's kind of a love story. James, tell us a little bit about Craig Foster, who is the subject of this documentary, and how he came to be in this South African kelp forest.
I'd never heard of Craig or never met him before I was involved in this, and Pippa has been friends and collaborated with him for many years, so I'm sure she'd have more to tell you about him. But it was very interesting for me because I came on quite late in the process, and so much amazing sort of work had been done, and this whole relationship with the octopus had already happened, and Craig had recorded it all. And he and Pippa have been working together for a long time, sort of working their way through loads of potential options and how to sort of tell the story. And they got to a point where they wanted an outside perspective. They wanted somebody who didn't know Craig and who didn't know the story to come in. So actually, I mean, my process of getting to know Craig sort of happened on camera as well, because I kind of completely got where they were coming from, and I thought it was really valuable to the process to have somebody from the outside look in and to come and interview Craig, and to be asking as a stranger what it all sort of meant to him, and trying to find out who he was during the course of the interview. So, you know, I feel like I do know Craig pretty intimately now, and I'm very, very fond of him, and he's a fascinating and complicated person. But it was one of the most interesting processes of getting to know somebody, because we kind of deliberately didn't have a great deal of contact before the interview. And I felt like if I really want to be getting him to sort of explain his true sort of feelings and motivations and reactions, I want to do that fresh, and we may as well film it. So that was my first involvement in the project, other than some calls with Pippa and 2 calls with Craig. I went to South Africa and sat down at Craig's kitchen table and asked him what happened. And it was fantastic, because it was work, but it was also just a really fascinating conversation, and it's a real lesson, you know. I mean, if you're trying to that's what you want the audience to experience, is to sort of get to know someone and understand them, and understand the octopus that he'd been so closely connected to. It was brilliant to be able to explore that genuinely. So it's really interesting. Like, he and I have spent a bit of, and we've talked quite a bit on the phone afterwards, and we did around the interviews, but the majority of my conversations with Craig have happened on camera.
Well, Pippa, I would say that the narration is part of what makes the movie, and how Craig and you came to work together on this.
Oh, I met Craig quite a long time ago through a mutual friend, and he took me for a dive. He took me and our friend Ross diving, and I've been diving in Cape Town, since I was in my early 20s. And we went out on this day, and we weren't wearing wetsuits, and I didn't know any of the people we were diving with very well, and I didn't really know what to expect. But from the very first moment we got down to the shore, before we were even in the water, I realized that this guy is understanding this environment on a level that I've never seen before. And it was literally, I always say, it was like putting on a pair of magical goggles, because he was finding animals that I didn't know lived there. He was seeing them doing things and pointing out behavior that I'd never imagined was possible. And I was just so fascinated by that experience that about a year later, I went back to him and I said, I'd love to learn to track. And at the time I was working as a conservation journalist. And about 6 months later, he said, I'm going to make a film, and I've been thinking about it for a long time, and I didn't know what I was going to do, but I had this experience with an octopus, and would you like to be involved? And that's how the story started. And as you said, the way he narrates that film is so powerful, and it actually took a while to get to that kind of delivery, and that was why James coming on board was so powerful, because we tried it with voiceover and script before, and it just didn't translate as authentically and unexpectedly. And that was what was so incredible about that interview. And I mean, I was shooting second camera, and I remember watching it and being like so relieved and excited, because I could see how well the story was coming across.
I was curious if it was difficult to get him to explain himself and his emotions, because part of what the story you're telling is that he was depressed and morose, and part of his therapy in a way was going down underwater and communing with the creatures there and with the octopus. Perhaps you could explain a little of that, James.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think he was very brave. I mean, I think on all sorts of levels, on a very on his sort of personal backstory, he sort of exposed himself. And Craig is not somebody who gravitates towards that sort of attention. And I think this is part of the way through a lot of the whole process that happened beforehand. He very much wants people to focus on the octopus and what's amazing about her, and rightly so. But I think he kind of finally acknowledged that it needed his interpretation to really understand her. So as soon as he got that it wasn't distracting from her, it was a vehicle to get into her, then he bought into it. But I think, it's funny. I mean, it's just hearing us talk about it earlier about how that happened and how little I knew him. And like I said, in some ways, you might think, well, that's kind of the opposite that you need, isn't it? In order to get, a lot of people just wouldn't be able to share anything too personal, and particularly about, some mental health issues and personal things that he'd had in his life with a stranger. But we did meet and we talked just enough, and we kind of, I mean, Craig's got sort of he's quite an instinctive person, and I was very fortunate that I think he sort of had an instinct that it was going to be okay, and that we had enough in common just as people.
Part of what you're doing in the editing room is matching up the footage with the dialogue. So that must have been an interesting task. I bet that was a challenge.
It was a huge challenge, wasn't it, Pippa? I mean, it was exciting, like I think that, and I think Pippa will talk better about this, but arguably she had a tougher task before that in doing a lot of editing of storylines and sequences just based on the octopus and bits of Craig, and and bits of well, and some narration that was written with him and for him and spoken. I don't know, everyone's different with this. It really depends on your temperament, but I think that there's you have control in what you include and what you exclude, and you obviously you can apply emphasis and focus and structure to it, but you ultimately can't change the words that they say on, and nor do you want to change the sort of spirit of what they're saying. So even if you abbreviate things and simplify them, you want it to be, you know, legitimate and authentically representing what they meant as well. So it kind of limits your options in a way that I personally find quite liberating in a way. Pippa and I, in the early days when that interview first came back, because there was 14 hours of it in total, filmed across 3 days.
Wow.
You know, and that was all part of the approach, is that, you know, we just have to talk on Craig's timeline at a pace and in an order that he wants. So when he says, oh no, actually, no, I'll take you back 3 years when something, and you're like, okay, I'm not sure this is relevant, but let's go there anyway. And then so Pippa and I had a big job of like, how do we reduce this down to the story points that are relevant,
Right.
and sort of best match the things that have been captured visually about the relationship. And it was, yeah, it's kind of sculpting, because you have it all there, and then you just gradually chip away until what you're left with is an abbreviated version of that conversation that sort of best captures many years of his life. So it's
So
it was
Pippa,
hard, wasn't it? But it was good.
yeah, no, it's an amazing journey that you took. Pippa, tell us a little bit about what you actually started with. He shot for 75 days, 5 hours, literally shooting 5 hours a day. He dove. But
No,
some massive
he
camera
shot.
with him, with Roger Horrocks. Talk about that.
So when I kind of sat down at his edit suite for the first time, I just had a pile of hard drives like this. And some of them were filled with footage from the Kalahari, which was shot in like 1999. Because that was a lot of where Craig's thinking and Craig's ideas around tracking. It all came from his time tracking with Bushmen in the Kalahari, and we thought that could be a big part of the story. Then we had a couple more hard drives, which had footage of when he'd started diving before he'd met the octopus. And, you know, he dives every, you know, and stuff that after the octopus had died, he's carried on this practice of diving every single day. So there were piles and piles and piles of drives. And then the most important drives were the ones that had been filled during his year diving with this octopus every day. So he doesn't dive for 5 hours. He's not wearing a wetsuit and he's not wearing scuba. So he's normally in for an hour at a time. When something's happening that he's really interested in and kind of obsessed with, he'll dive a few times a day, which is often what happens.
How long can he hold his breath?
On land, I think he can hold his breath for 6 minutes because during lockdown, we all spent a lot of time seeing how hard we could hold our breath. But underwater, like a 2-minute dive is a long time.
Wow.
But Roger Horrocks.
To remember that, you know, this whole, you know, it's all happening on a single breath. And like, you know, I mean, I do a little bit of free diving. Pippa's much more experienced than I am, but to actually, you know, it's effort enough to just get down in the right place as well. You imagine the swells going everywhere in the kelp forest as well. So, and the visibility isn't amazing. To even just get down to where you want to be and in a position you want to be, that takes quite a lot of effort. And you've already used a lot of your sort of store of oxygen that you sucked in. And then to actually sort of operate a camera, get in, then you're in the place you want to be, but now you want the frame to be where you want it to be. And you're dealing with an unpredictable animal that somehow you've spotted from the surface and you think is there, but you're not quite sure because she's invisible basically. So the idea that he just got down in that, all these things he's managing to do, and then he's got to record something for long enough that a piece of behavior or action unfolds that kind of means something.
So it's a
And-
lot of little bits that you had to turn into a coherent narrative. So Pippa, I had one question, and you as a diver could answer this. Was the fact that he wasn't wearing a wetsuit and that he was free diving, that his bare skin was what was exposed to the water, did that have was that an aspect of making it possible for him to bond with the octopus?
That's something that we've debated. I think that the smell of neoprene definitely affects animals. I don't know if wearing all black might be a bit seal-like, and that might have been more threatening to her because seals are a big predator of octopuses. I feel like, wearing it, because I don't dive with a wetsuit either, and I think the major disadvantage is you can't stay in the water for as long. But the advantages are, I think you don't smell like neoprene in the water, and you're much more sensitive when you're moving through the water. So a lot of the ways that animals figure out what's around them is they kind of sense the amount of pressure and the pressure waves that are passing through the water around them. And when you're not wearing a wetsuit, you can feel how much you're splashing and how smoothly you're moving. So you just become a lot more tuned in to the impact you're having on your environment.
So one of the questions I have for you, and it might be part of what your editor had to deal with too, is just how you have the narration and you have a kind of explanation of what the octopus is going through. At what point are you imposing and projecting onto something more, perhaps, than was actually there? That was a big question for me.
Well, I think we told the story from Craig's point of view. And he spent all that time with that animal, and he reads every scientific paper he can find on octopuses, and he talks to octopus experts from all over the world. We actually flew Professor Jennifer Mather out to Cape Town from Canada, and she sat with us and went through every single frame of the cut and told us what she thought was going on. And she's the world's kind of only octopus psychologist. So those are her two fields of expertise. She's a psychologist and a scientist. Yeah. So we did whatever we could to be as accurate as we could be, but ultimately Craig's telling the story, so we kind of felt like we needed to honor his experience as well. I mean,
James, did you have more to add?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, we did talk about it quite a lot because we were straying into areas where, you can't know what she was thinking. You can't know what her intentions were. We could consult, and Pippa and Craig did with experts, but I think that we felt confident with that. And this is another strength of dealing with it's not a script that we are writing. So we are showing the audience at the start that this is Craig and this is who he is and this is what his background is. And these are his experiences and these are his interpretations of those experiences. And I think that I hope that was clear to most people watching it. I mean, I think like Pippa says, we wouldn't have wanted anything to be in there that was questionable or that we knew to be questionable or doubtful in terms of its scientific interpretation. So we did check those things. But there are things in there, for instance, when he talks about she's playing, the way he describes that, and he said to me, it's like she was playing. So he's offering his reaction to it. He's not telling us that.
So if anyone is projecting, it's him.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, and we are projecting on his behalf. I mean, we edited the film, so we're including those things. We are making choices all the way along, but I think we talked a lot about that early on and felt that, well, if Craig believed it and it is legitimate and there's nothing scientific that says that that's not possible, and that's what it looks like to us, then all these things in the context of how the story is told, we thought that was the right way to go.
Did you ever have to do any recreations?
I mean, of Craig, yes. So a lot of the filming that we did afterwards was shots of Craig swimming along the surface or looking under rocks with his torch, because there was, for the most part, sometimes Roger was with him, but a lot of the time, a lot of the shots with him and the octopus he filmed himself. He'd put his camera down on the sea floor.
Mm.
But yeah, we had to put him into the story.
What kind of cameras were you using?
A lot. Roger Horrocks was on a Red. Craig has a small camera. I think you actually see it in the film that he takes in with him every day. We had a medium-sized camera that I was diving with. Yeah, and then many cameras topside as well.
It's absolutely stunning. And what kind of scientific revelations did Craig make in terms of the behavior of octopuses? It seems like this particular octopus was displaying behaviors and intelligence that were beyond what most people thought were normal.
I think the big thing was the armoring behavior.
Yeah.
Which
she
she kind of,
yeah.
Yeah. And the same thing with the kelp basket. And these behaviors, Craig discovered them through this octopus, but we've since seen other octopuses in the kelp forest that do the same thing. So that's really interesting, because you realize that over millions of years, they've evolved in this environment and they've developed these specific skills because they're dealing with all of these predators all the time. And if they want to survive, they've got to know what to do. So those are the two biggest ones.
What were things like, Pippa, that I feel like it's never been seen before, never filmed before, but when she got on the back of the shark?
That interestingly, it's probably never been filmed on a pajama shark, but it's been photographed on the backs of dolphins, for example. They're photographs of octopuses that have been attacked, getting out of the dolphin's mouth and sometimes even covering its blowhole. There are accounts of octopuses kind of strangling animals, so they're super clever.
What about because some of the walking behavior, was it the old lady in the dress? I mean, that's his name for it, but there were lots of different ways of moving. Some of that, and I'm trying to recall, it's such a long time ago now.
I think a lot of it hasn't been filmed before, but it has been observed. The walking certainly been observed. I mean, they're actually scientific names for the different postures that the octopus goes into. That we talk about, like octopus language and things that she does where she makes her eyes big and black, that makes her look much bigger and scarier than she actually is, or when she twirls her legs up into little towers and then she's unrecognizable as an octopus.
No, it's funny. I mean, it's so great that it was a really interesting process, in the sort of the scientific newness of it has come in. The value of that has come in kind of waves a little bit. There's a point when it was sort of what we hung a lot of our sort of belief in it on. There's so many new things scientifically, and then it's funny, it falls away a little bit because the sort of everything suddenly feels new, because it's all about her and it's all about him, and it's a completely new relationship, and everything is new. We start thinking of her as more of an individual, so that what has been observed in other octopus kind of sort of becomes less relevant, because it's what she did in that moment, and you start to see a more nuance.
That's right. And Craig moves on to become closer to his son, which is an important part of the story. What is he doing now? Where has he gone off to as we wind up?
Craig's just doing what he's always done. He's going in the kelp forest every day, twice a day if he can, and taking photographs and recording every exciting thing that he sees and backing up his hard drives obsessively. Yeah, I mean, he's really fallen in love with the environment, so that's what he's
Yeah.
going to be doing for the rest of his life.
Well, congratulations. It sounds like this was one of those magical times when all the right people somehow managed to get involved in a project and turn it into something very special. And as all those Netflix viewers attest, I mean, it's one of the most popular documentaries they've ever shown, I think.
They've been very, very pleased with it, and they've been incredibly, I mean, people agree, I'm sure, incredibly supportive throughout the process when they were, when they were commissioning it, and then worked especially with Pippa very closely towards the end of it, where we're sort of still finessing it. And since then have been just incredibly supportive. They wanted us involved in a lot of stuff, but have been very keen to promote the film. And Sarah Edelson, the commissioner, sort of reminded us she's really proud of it. And when she commissioned it, it was considered internally Sarah's little passion project, because she really believed in it.
Congratulations, and thank you for being part of this, and thank you everyone for watching and being part of this as well. And goodbye. Thanks.
Thanks very much.